Okay, well, we're delighted we found seats for you all because this reading was sold out, or booked out, rather, within 1 hour of it going up on the Chambers website. Um, and there is a waiting list as long as an arm or two. And, okay, what is going to happen now is I'm going to give you a brief synopsis of the story. If you read the whole thing, then it would take about 3 hours to read. Of course, that is absolutely nothing to a Victorian audience, but people have shorter time spans these days. So thought we'd cut it down a bit, and that will take the full reading will take just over an hour. Before that, I'm going to give you a brief synopsis of the story. And when we start the reading, because I've abridged it, every now and again, I'm going to read a short synopsis again of the passages that we've skipped over. I got to apologise to you because we advertised this as being by candlelight. I'm afraid fire regulations have come in, and as a result of which we weren't able to give you a full panoply of candles, but only these sort of little flickering things on the mantelpiece there instead, and what Owen and I have between us. After I've given the synopsis, I'm then going to read to you the introduction to the 1912 centennial edition of Dickens' Christmas Stories, which was produced by Pears Soap. And the illustrations, which you're going to be seeing up on the screen here, come from that same edition. And what the introduction tells you is how Dickens got the idea for the story, and gives an account of the very first reading that took place in the room that you've just seen. So I'm now going to launch into the synopsis. This story is about a set of chimes or bells high up in the steeple of an ancient church. We're not told where it is, but most likely somewhere in London. And an aged ticket porter, Toby or Trotty Veck, is a ticket porter is a message carrier, letter carrier of the time. Other characters are Toby's daughter Meg, her fiance Richard, a justice of the peace, Alderman Cute, and an MP, Sir Joseph Bowley, and also a labourer, Will Fern, who has come to London looking for work with his little daughter Lillian. And last, a landlady and shopkeeper, Mrs. Chickenstalker. Trotty is convinced by the Justice of the Peace and the MP that the poor have no one to blame but themselves for their condition and their refusal to better themselves as their superiors urge them to. One night, just before New Year's Eve, having out of the kindness of his heart taken in Will Fern and Lillian, he seems to hear the chime summoning him to the belfry. There each bell transforms itself into a menacing goblin figure, and he is sent on a terrible journey, guided by the spirit of little Lillian, to learn the error of what he has been taught. Of course, it's Christmas, it's chickens, and so it ends well. There are times when you might not think it will. Now the introduction. In the year 1844, the year in which this pretty Christmas story was written, Charles Dickens had attained to as great a success as was ever vouchsafed to an author. He was honoured by the public with more of hero worship than has been the lot of any Englishman of letters before or since. Side by side with this feeling on the part of the stranger, we may note the strong personal esteem that was felt for Dickens by a multitude of friends. Success brings many good things in its train, among them not least those who have known poverty and hardship in early years, the opportunity of exchanging a limited horizon for foreign travel. Italy was the go, and a farewell dinner, partly in honour of the completion of Martin Chuzzlewit, partly to wish the great novelist Godspeed, was giving at Greenwich. On the 16th of July, he was at Albaro, a suburb of Genoa. Here, listening one evening to the bells from the city afar, up from it, with some sudden set of the wind, came in one fell sound the clang and clash of all its steeples, pouring into his ears again and again in a toneless, grating, discordant, jerking, hideous vibration. 2 days later, he wrote to his friend Forster, "We have heard the chimes at midnight, Master Shallow," and the title for his next Christmas story was found. Dickens continued, "In my mind's eye, Horatio, I like more and more my notion of making in this little book a great blow for the poor." On the 3rd of November, 1844, the little story was finished. "Thank God I've finished the Chimes," he wrote to Forster. "I take up my pen again today to say only that much, to add that I have had what women call a real good cry." He travelled all the way from Genoa to London, partly for a week's change, but principally that he might read the story to some of his friends, including the historian Carlyle. He hoped that Landseer and Gerald and other well-known men whom he named would be of the part. The actual company is here reproduced by the pencil of Maclise. And now I'm going to, with luck, change this illustration. This, by the way, is Dickens as he would have looked in 1844. So this is the young, beardless Dickens. And this picture is held by the Dickens Museum in Doughty Street. It was painted in 1843, and after a while disappeared until it was discovered in the effects of a recently deceased in South Africa in 2017. And it then came on the market and it was purchased by the Dickens Museum after a fundraising campaign. And here again, we have the picture that I showed you before. From London, from the Piazza Coffee House, Covent Garden, he writes to his wife in December 1844 of the reception of the book by his friends. Forster had read it to Gilbert Beckett, who cried so much and so painfully that Forster didn't know whether to go on or stop. And after his own reading at Forster's house, he added, "If you had seen Macready undisguising sobbing and crying on the sofa as I read, you would have felt as I did what a thing it is to have power." In the Chimes, we have the beginning of Dickens' plea for social reform, a plea which reached its highest point in Hard Times, a novel that Mr. Ruskin naturally thought to be Dickens' greatest novel. Dickens, it would seem, had aspired to convert man, hard, stern, unsympathetic man, to belief in his poorer fellow man in the Carol. In the Chimes, he attempted to convert society to a belief in the poor man, and above all, to convert the poor man to a belief in himself and in his class. Dickens held that condescension towards the poor on the part of the rich, the continual assertions that their poor were thriftless and vicious, that all their sufferings are due to themselves alone, that they must have fewer children, and so on, is cant. He recognizes chance, luck, what you will, has gone to make a few men rise from that class to affluence, and generally therewith to arrogance. And he recognized, moreover, the lack of equality of opportunity, which in his day, much more than in our own, this might be thought a bit optimistic on the part of the writer, was so marked in the world of struggle and endeavour. It may be the Chimes no longer serves as it did Macready and Douglas to drive them to tears, but it has innumerable Dickens touches, and still, as one of a quintet of Christmas stories, leaves far behind most of the literature of Christmas from other and rival pens. I mean,
there are not many people, and as it is desirable that a storyteller and a story reader should establish a mutual understanding as soon as possible, I beg it to be noticed that I confine this observation neither to young people nor to little people, but extend it to all conditions of people, little and big, young and old, yet growing up or already growing down again. There are not, I say, many people who would care to sleep in a church. I don't mean it's sermon time in warm weather when the thing has actually been done once or twice, but in the night and alone. A great multitude of persons will be violently astonished, I know, by this position in the broad, bold day. But it applies to night. It must be argued by night, and I will undertake to maintain it successfully on any gusty winter's night appointed for the purpose, with any one opponent chosen from the rest who will meet me singly in an old churchyard before an old church door, and will previously empower me to lock him in, if needful to his satisfaction, until morning. For the night wind has a dismal trick of wandering round and round a building of that sort, and moaning as it goes, and of trying with its unseen hand the windows and the doors, and seeking out some crevices by which to enter. And when it has got in, as one not finding what it seeks, whatever that may be, it wails and howls to issue forth again, and not content with stalking through the aisles and gliding round and round the pillars and tempting the deep organ, soars up to the roof and strives to rend the rafters, then flings itself despairingly upon the stones below and passes muttering into the vaults. Anon it comes up stealthily and creeps along the walls, seeming to read in whispers the inscriptions sacred to the dead. At some of these, it breaks out shrilly as with laughter, and at others moans and cries as if it were lamenting. It has a ghostly sound, too, lingering within the altar, where it seems to chaunt in its wild way of wrong and murder done and false gods worshipped in defiance of the tables of the law, which look so fair and smooth, but are so flawed and broken. Oh, heavens preserve us, sitting snugly round the fire. It has an awful voice, that wind at midnight, singing in a church. But high up in the steeple, there the foul blast roars and whistles, high up in the steeple, where it is free to come and go through many an airy arch and loophole, and to twist and twine itself about the giddy stair, and twirl the groaning weathercock, and make the very tower shake and shiver. High up in the steeple, where the belfry is, and iron rails are ragged with rust, and sheets of lead and copper, shriveled by the changing weather, crackle and heave beneath the unaccustomed tread, and birds stuff shabby nests in corners of old oaken joists and beams, and dust grows old and grey, and speckled spiders, indolent and fat with long security, swing idly to and fro in the vibration of the bells, and never lose their hold upon their thread-spun castles in the air, or climb up sailor-like in quick alarm, or drop upon the ground and ply a score of nimble legs to save one life. High up in the steeple of an old church, far above the light and murmur of the town, and far below flying clouds that shadow it, is the wild and dreary place at night. And high up in the steeple of an old dwelt the chimes I tell of. They were old, the chimes, trust me. Centuries ago, these bells had been baptized by bishops. So many centuries ago that the register of their baptism was lost long, long before the memory of man, and no one knew their names. They had had their godfathers and godmothers, these bells. For my part, by the way, I would rather incur the responsibility of being godfather to a bell than a boy, and had their silver mugs, no doubts, besides. But time had mowed down their sponsors, and Henry VIII had melted down their mugs, and they now hung nameless and mugless in the church tower. Not speechless, though, far from it. They had a clear, loud, lusty sounding voices had these bells, and far and wide they might be heard upon the wind. Much too sturdy chimes they were, to be dependent on the pleasure of the wind, moreover, for fighting gallantly against it when it took an adverse room that would pour their cheerful notes into a listening ear right royally, and bent upon being heard on stormy nights by some poor mother watching a sick child, or some lone wife whose husband was at sea. They had sometimes known to beat a blistering nor'wester, aye, all to fits, as Toby Veck said. Although they call him Toby Trotty Veck, his name was Toby, and nobody could make it anything else except Tobias, without a special act of parliament, he having been as lawfully christened in his day as the bells had been in theirs, though with not quite so much of solemnity or public rejoicing. For my part, I confess myself of Toby Veck's belief, for I'm sure he had opportunities enough of forming a correct one. And whatever Toby Veck said, I say, and I take my stand by Toby Veck, although he did stand all along, and weary work it was, just outside the church door. In fact, he was a ticket porter, Toby Veck, and waited there for jobs.
There he is. They called him Trotty from his pace, which meant speed if it didn't make it. He could have walked faster, perhaps, most likely, but rob him of his trot, and Toby would have taken to his bed and died. It bespattered him with mud in dirty weather. It cost him a world of trouble. He could have walked with infinitely greater ease, for that was one reason for his clinging to it so tenaciously. A weak, small, spare old man, he was a very Hercules, this Toby, in his good intentions. He loved to earn his money. He delighted to believe, Toby was very poor, couldn't well afford to part with the delight, that he was worth his salt. With a shilling or an 18-penny message or small parcel in hand, his courage, always high, rose higher, and he had perfect faith, not often tested, in his being able to carry anything that man could lift. And falling out into the road to look up at the belfry, when the chimes resounded, Trotty trotted still. He made this last excursion several times a day, for they were company to him, and when he heard their voices, had an interest in glancing at their lodging place and thinking how they moved and what hammers beat upon them. Perhaps he was the more curious about these bells because there were points of resemblance between themselves and him. They hung there in all weathers, with the wind and rain driving in upon them, facing only the outsides of all those houses, never getting any nearer to the blazing fires that gleamed and shone on the windows, or came puffing out of the chimney tops and incapable of participation in any of the good things that were constantly being handed through the street doors and the area railings to prodigious cooks. Faces came and went at many windows, sometimes pretty faces, youthful faces, pleasant faces, sometimes the reverse. But Toby knew no more, though he often speculated on these trifles, standing idle on the streets, whence they came or where they went, or whether, when the lips moved, one kind word was said of him in all the year than did the chimes themselves. Now, at this point, Trotty is met by his daughter Meg, who is carrying tripe, a treat for his dinner. She tells him she and her fiancé, Richard, have decided to marry on New Year's Day. Richard joins them while Toby eats his dinner on the steps of a house until out of it comes three men, preceded by a footman, including Alderman Cute, a justice of the peace. Seeing Meg, he learns from Trotty she is to be married.
Alderman Cute was mightily diverted and laid his right forefinger on the side of his nose, as much to say to both his friends, "Here, observe me, will you? Keep your eye on the practical man," and called Meg to him. "Come here, my girl," said Alderman Cute. The young blood of her lover had been mounting wrathfully within the last few minutes, and he was indisposed to let her come. But setting a constraint upon himself, he came forward with a stride as Meg approached and stood beside her. Trotty kept her hand within his arm still, but looked from face to face, as wildly as a sleeper in a dream. "Now I'm going to give you a word or two of good advice, my girl," said the alderman in his nice, easy way. "It's my place to give advice, you know, because I'm a justice. You know I'm a justice, don't you?" Meg timidly said yes, but everybody knew Alderman Cute was a justice. Oh dear, so active, a justice, always. Who such a mote of brightness in the public eye as Cute? "You are going to be married, you say," pursued the alderman. "Very unbecoming and indelicate in one of your sex. But never mind that. After you are married, you'll quarrel with your husband and come to be a distressed wife. You may think not, but you will, because I tell you so. Now I give you fair warning that I have made my mind to put distressed wives down. So don't be brought before me. You'll have boys, children. Those boys will grow up bad, of course, and run wild in the streets without shoes and stockings. Mind, my good friend, I'll convict them summarily, every one, for I am determined to put boys without shoes and stockings down. Perhaps your husband will die young, most likely, and leave you with a baby. Then you'll be turned out of doors and wander up the streets. Now, don't wander near me, my dear, for I am resolved to put all wandering mothers down. All young mothers, of all sorts and kinds, it's my determination to put down. Don't think to plead illness as an excuse with me, or babies as an excuse with me. For all sick person and young children, I hope you know the church service, but I'm afraid not. I am determined to put down. And if you attempt desperately and ungratefully and impiously and fraudulently attempt to drown yourself or hang yourself, I'll have no pity for you, for I have made up my mind to put all suicide down. If there is one thing, said the alderman with his self-satisfied smile, on which I can be said to have made up my mind more than other, it is to put suicide down. So don't try it on. That's the phrase, isn't it? Ha! Now we understand each other. Toby knew not whether to be agonized or glad to see that Meg had turned a deadly white and dropped her lover's hand. And as for you, you dull dog, said the alderman, turning with even increased cheerfulness and urbanity to the young smith, what are you thinking of being married for? What do you want to be married for, you silly fellow? If I was young and fine, strapping like you, I would be ashamed of being milksop enough to pin myself to a woman's apron strings. Why, shall be an old woman before you're a middle-aged man. And a pretty figure you'll cut then, with a draggle-tailed wife and a crowd of squalling children crying after wherever you go. Oh, he knew how to banter the common people, Alderman Cute. There, go along with you, said the alderman, and repent. And don't make such a fool of yourself as to get married on New Year's Day. You'll think very different of it long before New Year's Day. A trim young fellow like you, with all the girls looking after you. There, go along with you. They went along, not arm in arm or hand in hand, or interchanging bright glances, but she in tears, he gloomy and down-looking. Were these the hearts that had so lately made old Toby's leap up from its faintness? No, no, the alderman, a blessing on his bed, had put them down. As you happen to be here, said the alderman to Toby, you shall carry a letter for me. Can you be quick?
So at this point, Trotty takes the letter to a grand part of town, to the house of Sir Joseph Bowley, MP, where he is sent in by a pompous, slow-moving porter. "You ought to take it in yourself," said the porter, pointing to a room at the end of a long passage opening from the hall. "Everything goes straight in on this day of the year. You're not a bit too soon, for the carriage is at the door now. They've only come to town for a couple of hours of purpose." Toby wiped his feet, which were quite dry already, with great care and took the way pointed out to him, observing as it went that it was an awfully grand house, but hushed and covered up, as if the family were in the country. Knocking at the room door, he was told to enter from within, and doing so found himself in a spacious library, where at a table strewn with files and papers were a stately lady in a bonnet and a not very stately gentleman in black who wrote from her dictation, while another and an older and a much statelier gentleman whose hat and cane were on the table walked up and down with one hand on his breast and looked complacently from time to time at his own picture, a very full length, hanging over the fireplace. "What is this?" said the last named gentleman. "Mr. Fish, will you have the goodness to attend?" Mr. Fish begged pardon, and taking the letter from Toby, handed it with great respect. "From Alderman Cute, Sir Joseph. Is this all?" "Have you nothing else, porter?" inquired Sir Joseph. Toby replied in the negative. "You have no bill or demand upon me? My name is Bowley, Sir Joseph Bowley. Of any kind from anybody, have you?" said Sir Joseph. "If you have, present it. There is a checkbook by the side of Mr. Fish. I allow nothing to be carried into the new year. Every description of account is settled in this house at the close of the old one, so that if death were to cut," suggested Mr. Fish. "To sever, sir," returned Sir Joseph with great asperity. "The cord of existence, my affairs will be found, I hope, in a state of preparation." "My dear Sir Joseph," said the lady, who was greatly younger than the gentleman, "how shocking!" "My Lady Bowley," returned Sir Joseph, floundering now and then as in the great depth of his observations, "at this season of the year we should think of ourselves. We should look into our accounts. We should feel that every return of so eventful a period in human transactions involves a matter of deep moment between a man and his banker. Sir Joseph delivered these words as if he felt the full morality of what he was saying and desired that even Trotty should have an opportunity of being improved by such discourse. Possibly he had this end before him in still forbearing to break the seal of the letter and in telling Trotty to wait where he was a minute. Your only business, my good fellow, pursued Sir Joseph, looking abstractedly at Toby, your only business in life is with me. You needn't trouble yourself to think about anything. I will think for you. I know what is good for you. Now, the design of your creation is not that you should swill and guzzle and associate your enjoyments brutally with food. Toby thought remorsefully of the tripe, but that you should feel the dignity of labour. Go forth erect into the cheerful morning air and stop there. Live hard and temperately, be respectful, exercise your self-denial, bring up your family on next to nothing, pay your rent as regularly as a clock strikes, be punctual in your dealings. Nice children indeed, Sir Joseph, said the lady with a shudder. Rheumatisms and fevers and crooked legs and asthmas and all kinds of horrors. My lady, returned Sir Joseph with solemnity, not the less am I the poor man's friend and father. Not the less shall he receive encouragement at my hands. Every quarter day, he will be put in communication with Mr. Fish. Every New Year's Day, myself and friends will drink his health. Once every year, myself and friends will address him with the deepest feeling. Once in his life, he may even perhaps receive in public, in the presence of the gentry, a trifle from a friend. And when upheld no more by these stimulants and the dignity of labour, he sinks into his comfortable grave, then, my lady, here Sir Joseph blew his nose, I will be a friend and father on the same terms to his children. Toby was greatly moved. Oh, you have a thankful family, Sir Joseph, cried his wife. My lady, said Sir Joseph, quite majestically, ingratitude is known to be the sin of that class. I expect no other return. Ah, born bad, thought Toby, nothing melts us. With that great sentiment, Sir Joseph opened the alderman's letter and read it. In the letter, Alderman Cute seeks Sir Joseph's permission to put down, i.e. commit to prison as a vagabond, one Will Fern for coming to London from his village to look for work. Sir Joseph agrees because Will Fern was impertinent when Lady Bowley wanted the men and boys in the village to sing the following song.
Oh, let us love our occupations, bless the squire and his relations. Live upon our daily rations and always know our proper stations.
It appears, remarked Sir Joseph, when he had signed the letter and Mr. Fish was sealing it, as this were ordained, really. At the close of the year, I wind up my account and strike my balance, even with Will Fern. Trotty, who had long ago relapsed and was very low-spirited, stepped forward with a rueful face to take the letter. With my compliments and thanks, said Sir Joseph. Stop. Stop, echoed Mr. Fish. You have heard, perhaps, said Sir Joseph, oracularly, certain remarks into which I have been led respecting the solemn period of time at which we have arrived, and the duty imposed upon us of settling our affairs and being prepared. Now, my friend, can you lay your hand upon your heart and say that you also have made preparations for a new year? I'm afraid, sir, stammered Trotty, looking meekly at him, that I am a little behindhand with the world. Behindhand with the world, repeated Sir Joseph, in a tone of terrible distinctness. I'm afraid, sir, faltered Trotty, that there's a matter of 10 or 12 shillings owing to Mrs. Chickenstalker. Who, Mrs. Chickenstalker? Repeated Sir Joseph in the same tone as before. A shop, sir, exclaimed Toby, in the general line, and a little money on account of rent. Very little, sir. It oughtn't to be owing, I know, but we've been hard put to it indeed. Sir Joseph looked at his lady, and at Mr. Fish, and at Trotty, one after another, twice all round. He then made a despondent gesture with both hands at once, as if he gave it up altogether. How a man, even among this improvident and impractical race, an old man, a man grown grey, can look a new year in the face with his affairs in this condition. How he can lie down on his bed at night and get up again in the morning. There, he said, turning his back on Trotty, take the letter, take the letter. I heartily wish it was otherwise, sir, said Trotty, anxious to excuse himself. We have been tried very hard. Sir Joseph still repeating, take the letter, take the letter. And Mr. Fish not only saying the same thing, but giving additional force to the request by motioning the bearer to the door. He had nothing for it but to make his bow and leave the house. And in the street, poor Trotty pulled his worn old hat down on his head to hide the grief he felt at getting no hold on the new year anyhow. And at this point, and in that state, Trotty literally bumps into Will Fern with his little niece Lillian. Trotty warns him not to go to Alderman Cute the next day. He takes them home, and Meg and he feed them and see them to bed.
It was some short time before the foolish little old fellow could compose himself to mend the fire and draw his chair to the warm hearth. But when he had done so and had trimmed the light, he took his newspaper from his pocket and began to read, carelessly at first, and skimming up and down the columns and with an earnest and sad attention. Very soon, for his name, for the same dreaded paper, redirected Trotty's thoughts into the channel they had taken all day, and which the day's events had so marked out and shaped. His interest in the two wanderers had set him on another course of thinking, and a happier one for the time. But being alone again, and reading of the crimes and violences of the people, he relapsed into his former train. In this mood, he came to an account, and it was not the first he had ever read, of a woman who had laid her desperate hands not only on her own life, but on that of her young child, a crime so terrible and so revolting to his soul, dilated with the love of Meg, that he let the journal drop and fell back in his chair, appalled. Unnatural and cruel, Toby cried, and unnatural and cruel. None but people who were bad at heart, born bad, who had no business on the earth, could do such deeds. It's too true, all I've heard today, too just, too full of proof. We're bad. The chimes took up the words so suddenly, burst out so loud and clear and sonorous that the bells seemed to strike him in his chair. And what was that? They said, Toby Veck, waiting for you. Toby Veck, waiting for you. Toby, come and see us, come and see us. Drag him to us, drag him to us. Haunt and hunt him, haunt and hunt him. Break his slumbers, break his slumbers. Toby Veck, Toby Veck, door open wide. Toby, Toby, Toby Veck, door open wide. Toby, then fiercely back to their impetuous strain again and ringing in the very bricks and plaster on the walls. Toby listened. Fancy, fancy, his remorse of having run away from them that afternoon? No, nothing of the kind. Again, and yet a dozen times again. Haunt and haunt him, haunt and hunt him, drag him to us, drag him to us, deafening the whole town. Meg said, Trotty softly, tapping on her door, do you hear anything? I hear the bells, father. Surely they're very loud tonight. Is she asleep? Said Toby, making an excuse for peeping in. So peacefully and happily. I can't leave her yet, though, father. Look how she holds my hand. Meg, whispered Trotty, listen to the bells. She listened with her face towards him all the time, but underwent no change. She didn't understand them. Trotty withdrew, resumed his seat by the fire, and once more listened by himself. He remained here a little time. It was impossible to bear it. Their energy was dreadful. If the tower door is really open, said Toby hastily, laying aside his apron, but never thinking of his hat, what's to hinder me from going up into the steeple and satisfying myself? If it's shut, I don't want any other satisfaction. That's enough. He was pretty certain, as he slipped out quietly into the street, that he should find it shut and locked, for he knew the door well and had so rarely seen it open that he couldn't reckon above 3 times in all. It was a low arched portal outside the church, in a dark nook behind a column, and had such great iron hinges and such a monstrous lock that there was more hinge and lock than door. But what was his astonishment when coming bareheaded to the church and putting his hand into this dark nook, with a certain misgiving that it might be unexpectedly seized and a shivering propensity to draw it back again, he found that the door, which opened outwards, actually stood ajar. He thought on the first surprise of going back or getting light or a companion, but his courage aided him immediately, and he determined to ascend alone. What have I got to fear? Said Trotty. It's a church. Besides, the ringers may be there and have forgotten to shut the door. So he went in, feeling his way. He went like a blind man, for it was very and very quiet, for the chimes were silent. The dust from the street had blown into the recess, and lying there, heaped up, made it so soft and velvet-like to the foot that there was something startling even in that. The narrow stair was so close to the door, too, that he stumbled at the very first, and shutting the door upon himself by striking it with his foot and causing it to rebound back heavily, he couldn't open it again. There was another reason, however, for going on. Trotty groped his way and went on, up, 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 and round, and up, and up, higher, higher, higher up. At length, the dull and stifling atmosphere began to freshen, presently to feel quite windy. Presently it blew so strong that he could hardly keep his legs. But he got to an arched window in the tower, breast high, and holding tight, looked down upon the housetop, on the smoking chimneys, on the blur and blotch of lights, towards the place where Meg was wondering where he was and calling to him perhaps, all kneaded up in a leaven of mist and darkness. This was the belfry where the ringers came. He had caught hold of one of the frayed ropes which hung down through apertures in the oaken roof. At first he started thinking it was hair, then trembled at the very thought of waking the deep bell. The bells themselves were higher. Higher, Trotty, in his fascination, or in working out the spell upon him, groped his way. By ladders now, and toilsomely, for it was steep and not too certain holding for the feet. Up, 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 and clamber, up, higher, higher up, until ascending through the floor and pausing with his head just raised above its beams, he came among the bells. It was barely possible to make out their great shapes in the gloom, but there they were, shadowy and dark and dumb. A heavy sense of dread and loneliness fell instantly upon him as he climbed into this airy nest of stone and metal. His head went round and round. He listened and then raised a wild hello, hello, was mournfully protracted by the echoes. Giddy, confused, and out of breath and frightened, Toby looked about him vacantly and sunk down in a swoon.
Black are the brooding clouds and trouble the deep waters, when the sea of thought, first heaving from a calm, gives up its dead. Monsters uncouth and wild arise in premature, imperfect resurrection. Several parts and shapes of different things are joined and mixed by chance, and when and how and by what wonderful degrees each separates from each, and every sense and object of the mind resumes the usual form and lives again, no man can tell. So when and how the darkness of the night-black steeple changed to shining light, when and how the solitary tower was peopled with a myriad figures, when and how the whispered haunt and hunt him, breathing monotonously through his sleep or swoon, became a voice exclaiming in the waking ears of Trotty, there are no dates or means to tell. But awake and standing on his feet upon the boards where he had lately lain, he saw this goblin sight. He saw the tower, whither his charmed footsteps had brought him, swarming with dwarf phantoms, spirits, elfin creatures of the bells. He saw them leaping, flying, dropping, pouring from the bells without a pause. He saw them round him on the ground, above him in the air, clambering from him by the ropes below, looking down upon him from the massive iron-girded roof, peeping in upon him through the cheeks and loopholes in the walls, spreading away and away from him in enlarging circles as the water ripples give way to a huge stone that suddenly comes plashing in among them. He saw them of all aspects and all shapes. He saw them ugly, handsome, crippled, exquisitely formed. He saw them young, he saw them old, he saw them kind, he saw them cruel. He saw them merry, he saw them grim. He saw them dance and heard them sing. He saw them tear their hair and heard them howl. He saw the air thick with them, He saw them come and go incessantly. Stone and brick and slate and tile became transparent to him as to them. He saw them in the houses, busy at the sleepers' beds. He saw them soothing people in their dreams. He saw them beating them with knotted whips. He saw them yelling in their ears. He saw them playing softest music on their pillows. He saw them cheering some with the songs of birds and the perfume of flowers. He saw them flashing awful faces on the troubled rest of others from enchanted mirrors which they carried in their hands. He saw one buckling on innumerable wings to increase his speed, another loading himself with chains and weights to retard his. He saw some putting the hands of clocks forward, some putting the hands of clocks backward, some endeavouring to stop the clock entirely. He saw them representing here a marriage ceremony, there a funeral, in this chamber an election, in that a ball. He saw everywhere restless and untiring motion. Bewildered by the host of shifting and extraordinary figures, as well as by uproar of the bells, which all this while were ringing, Trotty clung to a wooden pillar for support and turned his white face here and there in mute and stunned astonishment. As he gazed, the chimes stopped. Instantaneous change. The whole swarm fainted. Their forms collapsed. Their speed deserted them. They sought to fly, and the act of falling died and melted into air. No fresh supply succeeded them. One straggler leaped down pretty briskly on the surface of the great bell and alighted on his feet, but he was dead and gone before he could turn round. Some few of the late company who had gambled in the tower remained there, spinning over and over a little longer, but these became at every turn more faint and few and feeble, and then the tower was silent. Then, and not before, did Trotty see in every bell a bearded figure of the bulk and stature of the bell, incomprehensibly a figure, and the bell itself, gigantic, grave, and darkly watchful of him as he stood rooted to the ground. Miraculous and awful figures resting on nothing, poised in the night air of the tower, with their draped and hooded heads merged in the dim roof, motionless and shadowy and dark. Although he saw them by some light belonging to themselves, none else was there, each with its muffled hand upon its goblin mouth. A blast of air, how cold and shrill, came moaning through the tower. As it died away, the great bell, or the goblin of the great bell, spoke. "What visitor is this?" it said. The voice was low and deep, and Trotty fancied it sounded in the other figures as well. "I thought my name was called by the chime," said Trotty, raising his hands in an attitude of supplication. "I hardly know why I am here or how I came. I have listened to the chimes these many years. They have cheered me often." "And have you thanked them?" said the bell. "1,000 times," cried Trotty. "How?" said the bell. "I'm a poor man," faltered Trotty, "and could only thank them in words." "And always so?" inquired the goblin of the bell. "Have you never done wrong in words?" "No," cried Trotty eagerly. But the bell pursued him.
"Who turns his back upon the fallen and disfigured of his kind, abandons them as vile, and does not trace and track with pitying eyes the unfenced precipice by which they fell from good, grasping in their fall some tufts and shreds of that lost soil, and clinging to them still when bruised and dying in the gulf below, does wrong to heaven and man, to time and to eternity, and you have done that wrong.
Spare me, cried Trotty, falling on his knees. For mercy's sake. Listen, said a shadow. Listen, cried the other shadows. Listen, said a clear and childlike voice, which Trotty thought he recognized as having heard before. Each of the shadowy figures stretched his right arm forth and pointed downwards. The spirit of the chimes is your companion, said the figure. Go, it stands behind you. Trotty turned and saw the child Will Fern had carried in the street, the child whom Meg had watched, but now asleep. I carried her myself tonight, said Trotty, in these arms. Show him what he calls himself, said the dark figures, one and all. The tower opened at his feet. He looked down and beheld his own form lying at the bottom on the outside, crushed and motionless. No more a living man, cried Trotty. Dead, dead, said the figures all together. Gracious heaven, and the new year? Past, said the figures. What, he cried, shuddering. I missed my way and coming on the outside of this tower in the dark fell down a year ago. 9 years ago, replied the figures. As they gave the answer, they recalled their outstretched hands, and where their figures had been, there the bells were. Again they rung, their time being come again. And once again, vast multitudes of phantoms sprang into existence. Once again were incoherently engaged as they had been before. Once again faded on the stopping of the chimes and dwindled into nothing. What are these? He asked his guide. If I am not mad, what are these? Spirits of the bells. Their sound upon the air, returned the child. They take such shapes and occupations as the hopes and thoughts of mortals and the recollections they have stored up give them. And you, said Trotty Wily, what are you? Hush, hush, returned the child. Look here. So the spirit of the chimes takes Trotty on a journey in which he sees Meg and Lillian, now reduced to destitution. In Lillian's case, worse. Meg and Richard have not married, being discouraged by Alderman Cute's words, and Richard too has fallen into degradation. Trotty sees Will Fern out of jail, denounced Bowley and Cute for injustice to the poor at a New Year's party. And finally, he sees Richard dying in the lodgings, Meg and Richard and Lillian's baby daughter, for Lillian has also died and taken from Mrs. Chickenstalker. She has married the pompous porter, Tugby, who wants Meg and the baby out. After Richard's death, Meg goes out to look for work.
She dressed the child next morning with unusual care, of vain expenditure of care upon such squalid robes, and once more tried to find some means of life. It was the last day of the old year. She tried till night and never broke her fast. She tried in vain. She mingled with an abject crowd who tarried in the snow until it pleased some officer appointed to dispense the public charity, the lawful charity, not the one preached upon a mount, to call them in and question them and say to this one, go to this, such a place, to that one, come next week, to make a football of another wretch and pass him here and there, from hand to hand, from house to house, until he wearied and lay down to die, or started up and robbed, and so became a higher sort of colonel, whose claims allowed of no delay. Here too she failed. She loved her child and wished to have it lying on her breast, and that was quite enough. It was night, a bleak, dark, cutting night, when pressing the child close to her for warmth, she arrived outside the house she called her home. She was so faint and giddy that she saw no one standing in the doorway until she was upon it and about to enter. Then she recognized the master of the house who had so disposed himself with his person. It was not difficult as to fill the whole entry. "Oh, you have come back," he said softly. She looked at the child and shook her head. "Don't you think you have lived here long enough without paying any rent? Don't you think that without any money you've been a pretty constant customer at this shop now?" said Mr. Tugby. She repeated the same mute appeal. "Suppose you try and deal somewhere else," he said, "and suppose you provide yourself with another lodging. Come, don't you think you could manage it?" He said in a low voice that it was very late. "Tomorrow." "Now I see what you want," said Tugby, "and what you mean. You know there are two parties in this house about you, and you delight in setting them by the ears. I don't want any quarrels. I'm speaking softly to avoid a quarrel. But if you don't go away, I'll speak out loud, and you shall cause words high enough to please you. But you shan't come in, that I'm determined." She put her hair back with her hand and looked in a sudden manner at the sky and the dark, lowering distance. "This is the last night of an old year, and I won't carry ill blood and quarrelings and disturbances into a new one to please you nor anybody else," said Tugby, who was quite a retail friend and father. "I wonder you aren't ashamed also of yourself to carry such practices into a new year. If you haven't any business in the world but to be always giving away and always making disturbances between man and wife, you'd be better out of it. Go along with you." Follow her to desperation. Again the old man heard the voices. Looking up, he saw the figures hovering in the air and pointing where she went down the dark street. "She loves it," he exclaimed in agonized entreaty for her. "Chimes, she loves it still." "Follow her." The shadow swept upon the track she had taken like a cloud. He joined in the pursuit. He kept close to her. He looked her in the face. He saw the same fierce and terrible expression mingling with her love and kindling in her eyes. He heard her say, "Like Lillian, to be changed like Lillian," and her speed redoubled. Oh, for something to awaken her, for any sight or sound or scent to call up tender recollections in a brain on fire, for any gentle image of the past to rise before. "I was her father, I was her father," cried the old man, stretching out his hands to the dark shadows flying on above. "Have mercy on her and on me. Where does she go? Turn her back. I was her father." But they only pointed to her as she hurried on and said, "To desperation, learn it from a creature dearest to your heart." 100 voices echoed it. The air was made of breath expended in those words. He seemed to take them in at every gasp he drew. They were everywhere and not to be escaped. And still she hurried on, the same light in her eyes, the same words in her mouth. Like Lillian, to be changed like Lillian. All at once she stopped. "Now, turn her back," exclaimed the old man, tearing his white hair. "My child Meg, turn her back. Great father, turn her back." In her own scanty shawl, She wrapped the baby warm with her fevered hands. She smoothed its limbs, composed its face, arranged its mean attire. In her wasted arms, she folded it as though she never would resign it more. And with her dry lips, kissed it in a final pang and last long agony of love. Putting its tiny hand up to her neck and holding it there within her dress, next to her distracted heart, she set its sleeping face against her, closely, steadily against her, and sped onwards to the river. To the rolling river, swift and dim, where winter night sat brooding like at last dark thoughts of many who had sought refuge there before her, where scattered lights upon the banks gleamed sullen, red and dull as torches that were burning there to show the way to death, where no abode of living people cast its shadow on the deep, impenetrable, melancholy shade. To the river, to that portal of eternity, her desperate footsteps tended with the swiftness of its rapid waters running to the sea. He tried to touch her as she passed him, going down to its dark level, but wild, distempered form, the fierce and terrible love, the desperation had left all human check or hold behind, swept by him like the wind. He followed her. He paused a moment on the brink before the dreadful plunge. He fell down on his knees and in a shriek addressed the figures and the bells now hovering above them. I have learnt it, cried the old man, from the creature dearest to my heart. Oh, save her, save her. He could wind his fingers in her dress, could hold it as the words escaped his lips. He felt his sense of touch return and knew that he detained her. The figures looked down steadfastly upon him. I have learnt it, cried the old man. Oh, mercy, have mercy upon me in this hour. If in my love for her, so young and good, I slandered nature at the breasts of brothers rendered desperate, pity my presumption, wickedness and ignorance, and save her. He felt his hold relaxing. They were silent still. Have mercy on her, he exclaimed. Think what her misery must have been when such seed bears such fruit. Heaven meant her to be good. There is no loving mother on the earth who might not come to this if such a life had gone before. Oh, have mercy on my child, who even at this pass means mercy to her own and dies and herself and perils her immortal soul to save it. She was in his arms. He held her now. His strength was like a giant's. I see the spirit of the chimes amongst you, cried the old man, singling out the child and speaking in some inspiration which their looks conveyed to him. I know that our inheritance is held in store for us by time. I know there is a sea of time to rise one day before which all who wrong us or oppress us will be swept away like leaves.
I see it on the flow. I know that we must trust and hope and neither doubt ourselves nor doubt the good in one another.
I have learnt it from the creature dearest to my heart. I clasp her in my arms again. O spirits merciful and good, I take your lesson to my breast along with her. O spirits merciful and good, I am grateful. He might have said more, but the bells, the old familiar bells, his own dear, constant, steady friends, the chimes, began to ring the joy peals for the new year so lustily, so merrily, so happily, so gaily, that he leapt upon his feet and broke the spell that bound him.
And whatever you do, Father, said Meg, don't eat tripe again. Without asking some doctor whether it's likely to agree with you, for how you have been going on. Good gracious. She was working with her needle at the little table by the fire, dressing her simple gown with ribbons for her wedding. So quietly happy, so blooming and youthful, so full of beautiful promise, he uttered a great cry as if it were an angel in his house, and flew to clasp her in his arms. But he caught his feet in the newspaper, which had fallen on the hearth. Somebody came rushing in between them. No, cried the voice of this same somebody. A generous and jolly voice it was. Not even you, not even you. The first kiss of Meg in the new year is mine, mine. I have been waiting outside the house this hour to hear the bells and claim it. Meg, my precious prize, a happy year, a life of happy years, my darling wife. And Richard smothered her with kisses. And tomorrow's your wedding day, my pet, cried Trotty. Your real happy wedding day. Today, cried Richard, shaking hands with him. Today, the chimes are ringing in the new year. Hear them. They were ringing. Bless their sturdy hearts. They were ringing. Great bells as they were. Melodious, deep-bowed, deep-mouthed, noble bells, cast in no common metal, made by no common founder. When had they ever chimed like that before? Then a band of music burst into the room, attended by a lot of neighbours, screaming, Happy New Year, Meg, happy wedding, many of them, and other fragmentary good wishes of that sort. The drum, who was a private friend of Trotty's, then stepped forward and said, Trotty Beck, my boy, it's got about that your daughter is going to be married tomorrow, and a soul that knows you that don't wish you well, or that knows her and don't wish her well, or that knows you both and don't wish you both all the happiness the new year can bring. And here we are to play it in and dance to it accordingly, which was received with a general shout. The drum was rather drunk by the by, but never mind. What happiness it is, I'm sure, said Trotty, to be so esteemed. How kind and neighbourly you are. And all along of my dear daughter. She deserves it. They were ready for a dance in half a second, Meg and Richard at the top, and the drum was on the very brink of feathering away with all his power, when a combination of prodigious sounds was heard outside, and a good-humoured, comely woman of some 50 years of age, or thereabouts, came running in, attended by a man bearing a stone pitcher of terrific size, and closely followed by marrow bones and cleavers and the bells, not the bells, but a portable collection on a frame. Trotty said, It's Mrs. Chickenstalker, and sat down and beat his knees again. Married and not tell me, Meg, cried the good woman. Married, I never, I couldn't sleep on the last night of the old year without coming to wish you joy. I couldn't have done it, Meg, not if I'd been bedridden. So here I am, and it's New Year's Eve, and the eve of your wedding too, my dear. I've had a little flip made and brought it with me. Mrs. Chickenstalker's notion of a little flip did honour to her character. The pitcher steamed and smoked and reeked like a volcano, and the man who carried it was found. Oh, said Trotty, please to play up there. Will you have the goodness? To the music of the band and the bells, the marrow bones and cleavers, all at once, And while the chimes were yet in lusty operation out of doors, Trotty, making Meg and Richard's second couple, led off Mrs. Chalker, Mrs. Chickenstalker, down the dance, and danced it in a step unknown before or since, founded on his own peculiar trot.
Had Trotty dreamt, or are his joys and sorrows, and the actors in them, but a dream, himself a dream, the teller of this tale, a dreamer, waking but now? If it be so, O listener, dear to him in all the visions, try to bear in mind the stern realities from which these shadows come, and in your sphere, none is too wide and none too limited for such an end. Endeavor to correct, improve, and soften them.
So may the new year be a happy one to you. Happy to all those who depend on you. And so may each year be happier than the last. And not the meanest of our brethren or sisterhood denied those rightful joys which the great Creator formed them to enjoy. I was about to say, I hope you enjoyed it, but I rather gather that you did. So what is going to happen now is that you're going to go down the stairs just outside this door, back into the hub, where there will be soft drinks, wine, and if you can face it, Dickens' favourite cocktail is being prepared. That's the Rocky Mountain Sneezer. Find out the story of it when you get that. Now, this is a fundraiser for Open House. And what I invite you to do is to drop your contribution into the top hat. I'm going to put here suggested £10 per person, £5 for unwaged pensioners and children, and the London Appreciation Society, different arrangements for you. So one other thing, and that is that I have copies of the illustrations here, about half a dozen of each, and rather more of the picture of the young Charles Dickens. So if you would like to carry those souvenirs away with you, then please feel free. There's only half a dozen of them. Just before we go, if I one last pale attempt. Yeah, and yes, the picture of Trotty and Mrs. Chickenstalker starting there.
Another one.
Will the one or two of the members of Garden Court here present lead people down to the hub, because you know where it is or how to get to it from here.